They said no one could survive the long winter in a cave. She didn't just survive, she turned stone into sanctuary, while the rest of the valley froze in their beds. The first time the widow pulled her children into that cold stone mouth of a mountain cave, not even the crow stirred, no wind, no rustle, just the crunch of her boots on the frost-bitten soil, and the silent judgments of settlers who stood watching from the trail. They didn't speak to her, they didn't need to, the way they turned their backs. The way their laughter carried after she passed said enough. Her name was Miriam Vale, 33, a widow of a railroad carpenter whose body had been buried without a coffin. After a beam broke his spine clean in two, she had nothing left of her husband but two things. A pair of wool-lined gloves patched with sinew and a small hand axe dulled at the edge. And their two children, Lena, aged 10 and quiet as snowfall, and Jacob, 6, stubborn and wide-eyed, always sniffing the air like a pup who didn't trust the world one bit. They moved into that cave not because they were mad, not because she fancied herself wild or witch-like. They did it because the cabin she tried to buy had been taken by another family, with more friends and louder voices, and the next cabin, 3 walls and no roof, had already collapsed under its own shame. There was nowhere else, just the cave, so Miriam didn't argue with fate. She wrapped her children tighter in blankets, dragged the handcart off the trail, and vanished into the stone. The mouth of the cave yawned like a wound stitched halfway shut by time. Inside it was wet, cold, and smelled like iron and moss. But it was deep. 40 feet inward, the rock opened wider, forming a chamber that once might have held fire pits and stories from an older people. That first night, with the children curled into her ribs, Miriam kept her hand on the axe, not for mountain cats or wolves, but because she knew settlers. Some of them thought caves belonged to men who drank too much or lost their minds in gold fever. A woman who claimed one that was just tempting the worst kind of visitor. They made it livable. By the end of the first week, the entry had been blocked with a half wall of stone and timber. Smoke curled through a crack they dug higher with stones and damp clay. She lined the inside with pine boughs, trapping heat and smell. When the children shivered, she boiled broth from root and marrow until the air felt thick and warm. And always, when footsteps passed near the rocks above, Miriam fell still, listening with her eyes. The settlers called it the mole hole. One of them, Bart Coy, even offered her pity wrapped in insult. He rode up to Thedrail, leaned down from his mule, and hollered into the wind, "You sure you don't want to come down and live with folks? Ain't no shame in asking for help. Just looks mighty sad from up here, that's all, sad and cold." She didn't answer, just held her daughter's hand tighter and pressed a wet cloth against Jacob's cough. That was the same week the first snow fell. Soft and early, but heavy as ash by December, the trail was buried in silence. Theblizard didn't announce itself. No red sky, no sudden drop in wind. It just came, one breathless morning. Snow fell like thick cotton and didn't stop. The flakes started small, but by midday they were fat, slapping against the cavi's timber face and hissing into the fire crack. The settlers in the valley below hadn't thought it would be bad. They'd mocked the early freeze, joked about another lazy winter. They'd stocked their cabins like it was any other year, some wood, not much kindling, and no backup for water once the barrels froze. Miriam, though, had watched the animals. She'd noticed the squirrels leaving the trees earlier, the birds flying south in restless, desperate flocks. She'd spent a whole week gathering and drying every root she could, cutting firewood with blistered hands, until Jacob had to sleep with her gloves wrapped around his feet. She knew. When the winds came down from the mountains and howled like wolves without bodies, Miriam didn't pray. She sealed the cave. She packed cracks with mud and old hides, layered the floor with branches and horsehair, and pulled the children tar-side under the buffalo skin she'd traded for a single silver earring. 3 days passed, then 5, then 9. Thekov stayed. Warm, smoke filtered upward. The stone held the heat like an oven, slow to warm, but slower to release. Water from the walls dripped into carved basins, pure and steady. The fire never went out, and the children didn't cug anymore. They sang softly, They played with pine cones and stones and made shadows dance against the walls. Outside, things weren't quiet. On the 12th day, she heard it. Footsteps, not a settler. Walking proud, but someone stumbling, one boot dragging. She looked through the peephole she'd left above the wood wall and saw a figure crumple in the snow. A man wrapped in a coat to sizes too small, beard frozen stiff. Shouldn't recognize the face until the wind knocked the hat aside. It was Bart Crawley. His eyes were wide, his lips cracked black. Miriam didn't rush. She waited, made sure the wind didn't carry any others. Only then did she pull a sided timber plank and step into the blizzard. Her gloves froze in seconds. She bent, grabbed Bart beneath the arms, and dragged him into the mouth of the cave like a corpse. Into a tomb. When he woke, he cried, he wept, openly like a child, told her that his chimney had collapsed on the third night, that his youngest had died in his arms from cold, and the others scattered toward towns that might not even still be there. He had nothing, no fire, no food, no rope, just the coat and the last trail he could find which led here. He said sorry for the jokes, for the name-calling, for pity he mistook for help. Miriam didn't speak. She fed him broth, laid him near the fire, and let Jacob place stones around him to trap more heat. By the 15th day, more came. First, a woman with frost-bitten fingers. Then a man carrying his daughter wrapped in gunny sackcloth. A boy whose dog had frozen beside him in the night. They came limping, crying, dragging sleds and half-starved donkeys. They came up the trail that led nowhere but a cave in the stone. She didn't turn them away. The cave was made for 3, but it fit 12 barely. Miriam gave up her sleeping mat. She taught them how to build a stone wall to reflect heat, how to boil pine needles for strength, how to melt snow safely without blackening the fire. And when the last family arrived, she didn't ask why they had come. She just made room. They stopped calling it the mole hole. They called it the oven. And still the storm did not stop. Snow piled high enough to swallow fences. Chimneys vanished. Trees cracked in the weight. Men who tried to dig out their cabins sometimes vanished in drifts taller than barns. The ones who lived, who escaped the lower valley with their skin intact, said it wasn't just a winter. It was the punishment of God himself, or maybe something older. The cave, meanwhile, stayed warm, but it had limits. By the 19th day, the wood pile was halfway gone. Miriam knew how to stretch it, but there were mouths now, more mouths than logs. And when the roots started to spoil, she realized something else. Not everyone would make it if the snow didn't stop soon. That night, she stood outside the wall of the cave, listening to the snow, watching the clouds churn, holding her axe. And from the trail below, lit by moonlight through cloud-split sky, she saw another figure approaching, stumbling, no coat, no shoes, just a blanket. Behind them, something darker loomed. Not snow, not fog, but motion, a group. She turned, went back. Inside, woke the fire, told them to stay quiet, to stay low. Then she waited, because not everyone who came up that trail would be looking for warmth. Not anymore. Miriam Vale stood at the sealed cave entrance, hand wrapped tight around the dull haft of her axe, listening not for the wind or the moan of snow, but for footsteps, real ones, intentional, cautious, the kind of sound that didn't belong to someone lost, but to someone hunting behind her. The air of the cave pulsed with warmth and breath. A dozen bodies, some wrapped in furs, others in patched rags, all pressed together. Their sleep uneasy. Her children were buried beneath her buffalo hide, their faces red-kiked and damp from heat. But safe. Lena stirred, sensing the change in her mother's posture, but Miriam didn't speak. The figure in the trail below grew clearer now, tall, limping, dragging one leg through the waist-high snow. The group behind him slowed, stopping short, maybe waiting for a signal. 5, maybe 6 silhouettes in total, too quiet for desperate settlers, too deliberate for wanderers. Miriam squinted through the frost. The leader's coat flapped open, no buttons. Shirt underneath was missing a sleeve. Hands were bare. His breath rose and broke like smoke, and his pace slowed as he reached a drift near the base of the rocks. He didn't call out, didn't wave, just stood there, swaying slightly, as if waiting to see if something would move in return. Then softly came through his soul 3 notes, low, then silence. Miriam froze. It wasn't a melody of desperation. It wasn't a prayer for shelter. It was a signal. She'd heard it once before, months back, when she'd passed through Juniper Hollow too. To death last of her silver for flint, a man had whistled it from behind the stable, and a young boy had passed him a satchel heavy with meat. She didn't know what was inside it then, but she'd seen the butcher's mark on the bag. That same whistle, that same rhythm, a thief's signal. She stepped back from the peephole, heart thudding slow and steady like hooves through snow. Bandits or, worse, deserters, men who'd fled the mining camps or the winter militias turned rogue and hungry, watching the valley for signs of heat and smoke. And what better mark than a cave billowing warmth while cabins below choked in frost? She had one chance, one breath. She moved to the fire, pulled two charred logs aside, and retrieved the small iron pot hidden in the ash dot inside, bare grease, cold as wax. She smeared it across her cheeks, her brow, the back of her neck, every place heat-scaped quickest. Then she lifted the axe, turned to the group huddled in the back chamber, and whispered, "Do not speak, do not cry out. If they come through, take the children and crawl through the back chute. You know where it goes." A man in the group, a school teacher who'd lost his wife to fever, opened his mouth to protest. Miriam silenced him with a look that made even the fire seem to flinch. She returned to the barrier, moved the plank an inch, and waited. The first knock was polite, then came another, harder. Then a voice, dry, deep, slurred slightly by cold. "Ma'am, we're cold, just travelers, ain't meaning harm." Another figure stepped forward, younger, beard frozen stiff to his collarbone. He held something under his coat. Miriam didn't need to see it to know it was a weapon. They always carried the weight the same way. One shoulder dipped low, ready to draw. "We seen the smoke," he continued. "Seen it a long while. Followed it, figured you might share a flame." She didn't answer, just let silence hang in there. Then the younger one laughed loud, sharp, a little too wild. "She's in there, all right, probably got a stew going. Hey, how many folks you got in there, miss? You got room for 6 more. More laughter from behind him. Miriam let the silence stretch, let it become something ugly. Then she whispered just loud enough to carry, "I've got enough shot to blind a bear, and enough men behind me to finish what's left. You take one more step and the snow will beard till spring." It was a bluff, but a dangerous one. The men didn't move for 5 breaths. All was still. Then one of them made a mistake. He stepped too far forward, tried to find a path through a drift leading to the cave wall, and when his boot sank to deep, he shouted, stumbled, and dropped what he was carrying, a rusted hatchet. It hit the snow with a dull thunk. Miriam struck. Then she flung the door open, just as Nato hurled a log lit at one end into the snow drift, fire licking from it like a snake. The sudden flash of flame on white sent the group reeling backward. A gun went off, blind, startled. The sound echoed off the cliffs. She ducked, slammed the wall shut, dropped the locking beam into place, and rolled back toward the fire. Inside, the children were awake now. Wide-eyed, not crying, just staring. Jacob had gripped a stick like it was a sword. Lena had pulled her brother behind her and was mouthing something, some prayer or line of song. The group outside didn't try again that night. Days passed. The snow didn't ease, not once. It was as if the world had turned in its sleep and forgotten to breathe. Even the animals had vanished. No fox prints, no squirrel chatter. Nothing but the wind gnawing at the cave's edges. The would-be raiders didn't return. Whether they'd turned to easier prey or perished in the white, no one could say. But Miriam checked the trail each morning through her peephole. Always by the 22nd day, the food was almost gone. She rationed quietly, measured the roots and dried meat against what her gut told her was coming. The children were thinner, so were the adults, but no one complained. No one dared. Miriam moved among them like a ghost with fire in her bones, always working, never resting. Until one night, Lena woke screaming. Miriam rushed to her side, found her soaked in sweat, hands clenched, face red. The girl muttered through cracked lips about a man in the snow, a face she knew but wrong, twisted, Jacob tried to comfort her, but he too was pale. Shaking, Miriam touched their skin, burning. The sickness came fast, some kind of fever, maybe from the water or from a root that hadn't boiled long enough. Maybe from the man Bart had brought an old wound that festered unseen. It didn't matter, within hours, two others were burning. The cave grew tense. The heat that once felt safe now felt like a trap. No air, no wind, just breath after breath. Thick and heavy, Miriam made a choice. She unsealed the vent above the fire. Let the wind scream in. Let the cold kiss stone again. She boiled every cloth they had. Burned every mat the sick had touched. She rubbed the children's skin with lard. Wrapped them in bark-infused linen and whispered old prayers she hadn't dared speak in years. She didn't sleep for 4 days. She didn't sleep, and then the fever broke, one by one. The flushed cheeks palled, the shaking stopped, the children's eyes opened wide and clear again. Miriam wept, not where anyone could see, but in the rear of the cave. Where the frost hadn't melted in weeks, she let the tears fall, not for relief, but for what might come next, because the cave had saved them once, maybe twice. But no cave could fight that hunger that was settling now in their bones. On the 25th day, she woke to silence. Not the silence of snow or cold, a different one. The wind had stopped. Outside, the air hung still, and in that stillness, she heard something she hadn't in weeks. Water melting, dripping, a slow release. She unbarred the wall, opened it fully for the first time in nearly a month, and the world outside had changed. The snow was still there, but thinner. The trail was visible again. Broken fence posts poked from drifts like fingers from graves. The sky above was pale. Trembling with weak light, the storm had passed. She stepped outside, boots crunching, breath steaming, and dropped to her knees. Pressed a hand to the earth, and whispered, "Thank you." Behind her, others emerged, slowly. 1by1, faces blinking at the brightness, children clutching parents. Bart Crawley stood beside her, face hollow, and muttered, "We made it." Miriam nodded once, then turned back to the cave. But even as they started to speak of returning to the valley, rebuilding, restocking, she didn't join them. She stayed still, eyes fixed on trail, because the blizzard may have ended. But the real test was just beginning. The snow melted slower than it returned, though the skies above had cleared, and the wind had finally stilled its ceaseless howl. The land or its silence like a warning. Snow still blanketed the valley, cracked and collapsing in places. But high in Therages where the widow's cave faced east, the drifts remained thick and bitter. And though the people within Theka began to speak again of spring, of rebuilding, of getting back to normal, Miriam Vale listened to none of it. She knew too well the kind of scars winter left behind, the kind you didn't see until too late. She'd seen men survive frost and starvation, only to collapse when they thought the worst was over, seen children laugh again, only to fall sick when the damp crept back into their lungs. And she knew that hunger had a way of returning minute after it had tasted your soul once. So while the others pulled down part of the cave's timber wall, to let in light while they spoke of heading back to burned out cabins and buried pots, Miriam set to work with her axe, not to leave, but Tadic. Jacob found her at dawn, shoulders covered in frost. Splitting frozen branches she'd scavenged from under Theka's overhang. "Mama," he said quietly, voice still scratchy, "why are you cutting more wood? Didn't the storm end?" Miriam didn't look up, just kept cutting, crack, crack, each swing deliberate. She paused to push the splinters into a pile. "It ended," she said. But not the cold. He came closer, rubbing his hands. "We're not going back with the others, no." Why? She finally stopped and looked down at him, at the dirt smudged on his cheek, the hole in his boot, the way he stood like he was ready to fight a man 3 times his size if she asked. "Because they're thinking like people who still have homes," she said, "and we never did." Jacob frowned, not quite understanding. She dropped to one knee. "Listen to me, Jacob." The snow melted, but nothing else changed. The river still frozen. The animals are still gone. The cabins down there might be nothing but black piles under the white, the ones who go rushing back. They're walking into an empty place thinking it remembers them. He blinked, then slowly nodded. "But we got this place, that's right, and we'll Keep it for now, she said, then stood, but we prepare for the next storm. Not the one that already passed. By the time the other families made ready to leave the cave, Miriam had already restocked 2 days' worth of firewood. She dug a new runoff channel for melting snow and reinforced the vent with a wooden brace. From a broken sled, the settlers offered her thanks. Some tried to hug her. Bart Cully, pale and still carrying the look of a man who hadn't slept right since the fever, stood at the cave's threshold, hesitant. "You sure you'll be all right?" he asked. "You and the kids?" Miriam gave him a look that might have been humor or might have been pity. "I've been all right since. Before you learned how to dry your boots, right, Bart?" He scratched the back of his neck, embarrassed. I mean, we could leave some supplies, me and the brains. We talked. You saved our lives." Miriam glanced back into the cave where Jacob was boiling pine sap, and Lena was sorting dried grasses for kindling. "You'll need them more than we will." He hesitated. "You're sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," she said, "but I'm not fooling out to think the land owes us anything." He nodded slowly, then stepped back. The others followed, heading down the trail in a staggered, silent procession, feet crunching against the half-frozen slush. Not one of them looked up at the ridge behind them. Not one of them saw Miriam stand at the cave mouth until they disappeared over their eyes, watching like a hawk who'd seen too many winters. Then she went back inside. The Thor brought with it strange things. First, the crows returned, quietly at first, perching along the rocky ridges above the cave, staring. Then came the scent. Something sour in the wind, like rot half-frozen. Jacob noticed it before she did. He said it made his nose hurt. Miriam knew what it was immediately. Death. The valley below had begun to reveal its secrets. And on third morning of sun, Jacob returned from fetching snow melt with a strange, twisted expression. "There's something sticking out of the snow," he said. "Down by the edge of the rocks. Looks like a wheel." Miriam followed him. It wasn't just a wheel. It was a wagon half buried in a drift, its canvas cover torn and frozen into stiff folds. No horse, no sled marks, just the wagon, tilted, on the axle broken. The other locked in place by a boulder. Miriam approached cautiously, axe in hand. She circled it, found the canvas entrance ripped open, and inside supplies. Not many, but real ones: a barrel of dried cornmeal, 2 sacks of oats, an iron kettle, and 3 sealed jars of what looked like honey. Under a blanket near the back lay airful, rusted but whole, and beside it, a Bible wrapped in wax cloth. Nobody, that more than anything, made her pause. "Someone died here," she muttered, "or they ran." Jacob said. She looked at him, surprised. He shrugged. "That's what I'd do. If the storm hit and the horse fell or ran, I'd grab what I could and run." She stared at the wagon a while longer, then nodded. "We'll take what we can. Leave the rest untouched for 3 days. If no one returns, we claim it." 3 days passed. No one came. By early March, the cave no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like a fortress. Miriam had turned the narrow chute in the back into a second exit. She taught Lena how to smoke moss to mask the scent of stew from animals. She made Jacob practice walking silently on stone barefoot in case he ever had to flee insolence. She kept the rifle beside her at night. Not loaded, not yet, but cleaned and primed. Then one morning, a dog came. It was mangy, ribs showing, a scar across one eye. Jacob heard it first, whining near the edge of the trail. Miriam watched it for a long time before she approached. Bread in hand, it didn't bolt, just stared. Then, without a sound, it turned and ran back the way it came down into the valley that night. Miriam sat by the fire, holding a jar of honey in her lap, staring into the flames. "They're coming back," she said. Lena looked up. "Who? The ones who didn't make it before, the ones who stayed too long, or the ones who ran too fast?" Jacob shifted uncomfortably. "Will they come here?" "Maybe." Lena hugged her knees. "What if they tried to take the cave?" Miriam didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Then we'll remind them it's not just a hole in the mountain. It's ours." It was 2 weeks later when the first stranger arrived. A man tall, wrapped in buffalo hide, face gaunt, and shadowed by grime. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't speak, just stood near the old trail and waited. Miriam saw him from the lookout, watched as he knelt in the snow, placed something in front of him, a small bundle, and stood again. Then he left. When she reached the spot, the bundle was still warm. Inside, a pouch of dried fruit and a torn scrap of parchment with one word inked in rough strokes. Safe. Miriam stared at it for a long time. Then, without knowing why, she whispered, "Not yet." She took the fruit, left a small piece of flint in its place, and returned to the cave. The snow didn't return that year, but the hunger did. Spring came late and thin, game was scarce. The river, when it finally thawed, ran low and slow. The towns to the east hadn't sent supplies, they were worse. Off than the frontier, word spread. Miriam never knew who started it. Maybe Bart, maybe one of the others who survived, but people began to talk of the cave widow, the one who outlasted the storm, the one who built warmth where no man could. They came in pairs, in families. A boy with frostbitten toes, a woman carrying twins in rags, a man dragging a handcart with one arm, the other wrapped in bloody cloth. Some wanted shelter. Some just wanted to know how she'd done it. She didn't offer answers. She offered wood. A cup of broth, a warning. The land doesn't love us, she said. It just forgets to kill us sometimes. They left with that. Some returned weeks later. Others didn't, but the cave endured, not because it was warm, but because Miriam Vale had learned a truth others hadn't. Survival wasn't about fire or food. It was about watching, waiting, knowing when to act and when to hold still like stone, and when to become a storm all your own. The spring that followed that terrible winter wasn't a spring at all. It was a long, drawn-out thaw, a tired exhale from the mountains that barely warmed the land before it rolled back into silence. Snow didn't vanish so much as retreat reluctantly in streaks and ridges. Grass didn't return in bursts, but in whispers. The river cut low and wheat through the valley like a blade dulled from too many wounds, and through all of it, the widow and her children remained in the cave. Some settlers returned to cabins that no longer stood. Others found their homes intact, but haunted by absence, by rot, by the cold that still seeped from the floor. Boards like old ghosts. What few outposts still functioned offered no help. The supply trains were broken, trade lines silent, and every hand that might have once offered bread now gripped their own crust too tight to share. But Miriam Vale did not ask. She did not knock on doors or leave signs in the road. She simply lived. By mid-April, word had reached as far as Boone's Hollow, the Resser woman in the cave above Widow's Rock. She never left. She made it through. If you're starving, maybe she can teach you to last. And they came. Not in mobs. Not yet, but steady, always with that same look in their eyes. Desperation salted with disbelief, like they didn't know whether to beg, barter, or accuse her of witchcraft. Miriam didn't welcome them, not with smiles or stories, but she fed them, taught them, sent them away stronger than they derived, and in the minds of many, she became something more than a mother or widow. She became a myth. It wasn't until the third week of May that a knock came, not for food, nor warmth, but for ownership. Miriam was binding sticks into a new rack fordering fish, a trick she'd learned by accident after a spring run had sent trout swarming the lower stream. When she heard the sound, not a knock at first, a voice, clear, loud, practiced, "Name's Alden Voss, I'm coming up." She paused. Jacob peeked from inside the cave where he'd been shaping flint against stone. "Who's that?" "No one we know," Miriam muttered. The man appeared moments later, stepping up the trail like he had every right in the world. Tall, lean, wearing a cityman's coat, brushed wool with silver trim, dusty, but clearly well cared for. He had a trimmed beard, dark gloves, and boots without a single crack. "Miss Vale?" he asked like he already knew her. Miriam didn't answer. "I was told you were up here, that you'd taken shelter in this cave over winter." He gestured to the slope. "That's county land, you know, designated as wilderness reserve." She raised one brow. "County sent you, not officially," he said with a grin. "But the council's reorganizing after the storms. They're assessing land use. They're claiming territory, assigning new settlement boundaries that includes natural shelters." Miriam's fingers curled around. the twine she'd been using. You're here to evict me. Oldenvoss chuckled like she'd told a good joke. No, no. I'm here to offer an arrangement. You've got something special here, ma'am. Reputation. People are talking about what you did up here, how you survived, how you kept others alive, that kind of street travels. She said nothing. He continued, the new settlers. They're coming in by the dozens. They'll need guidance. They'll need shelter. If this cave becomes county property, we'd rather have someone like you managing it than some greenhorn who's never swung an axe. You want me to work for you? I want to make you caretaker. He said smoothly, in name officially, you'd keep doing what you're doing, but with compensation, authority, protection. Jacob stepped forward. What kind of protection? Olden looked down at him. Smile unwavering. Legal supplies. Maybe a say in the council. Miriam stepped between them. I've lasted this long without help. Why now? Because they'll come anyway, Olden said, dropping the grin. The new ones, they'll see the smoke, hear the stories, they'll come with axes and plans. Better you have papers to wave in their face than just firewood and a bluff. For a moment, she said nothing, then she nodded once and turned back toward the cave. If I say no, she asked over her shoulder. Olden tilted his head. Then I mark this as contested, and the next party that arrives will claim it. And they might not be as civil as I am. She didn't answer. But the oak next morning she sent Jacob down the trail. With a folded page, it said, I was born with no name. To lean on, if someone wants to take the cave, they can try, but Winter already did and failed. That was the beginning of the second war over the cave. Not a war of bullets, but one of bodies. Every few days, new settlers passed through. Some polite, some hopeful, some desperate enough to offer half a winter's worth of jerky just to sleep under the rock for one night. Miriam accepted none of it. She let those who truly needed rest stay the night, but always on the condition you leave something behind better than you found it. Some left firewood. Others repaired the runoff channel. One man reinforced the timber vent and carved a windbreak along the cliff's edge. Using only a Keisel and willpower, in this way, the cave became more than hers. But also more hers than ever. It became proof that a woman alone, armed with nothing but grit and to children, could outlast the land's worst fury and build something from it. That summer, wildflowers returned to the ridges, thin, tired blooms, but blooms nonetheless. Jacob grew stronger. His cough vanished, his legs longer. He learned to trap rabbits and skin them with mini mulwaste. Lena started writing in charcoal along the inner cave wall, sketching scenes from memory. Blizzards, faces, firelight, shadows of trees. One day, Miriam caught her drawing a face with a badge pinned to its chest. Who's that? She asked. The man who tried to take our home, Lena said quietly. I wanted to remember. Miriam didn't scold her. She simply nodded and said, then make sure you draw the cave bigger than him. Fall came early, not harsh, not cruel, just fast. Like the mountain had forgotten it was summer. Leaves fell while some trees were still green. Wind snapped through the ridges like it was searching for something it lost last year. And on the last warm day of September, a family appeared at the base of the trail, a woman. 3 children, no father. They looked starved but proud. The woman carried a bough with cracked limbs and a spine like bent steel. She didn't beg, just waited. Miriam watched them for a full hour before calling down. You carrying sickness? No. Carrying greed? No. Then come up slow. They did. The children why deed. The woman nodding once. They stayed 3 nights, repaired part off outer wall, left a bundle of dried berries and a stitched pouch of salt before leaving. The woman turned and said, they say you're a witch. I'm not. Miriam said, they say the mountain spared you. It didn't. Then what did? Miriam thought for a long time, then answered, I refuse to die. That winter came quiet, no blizzard, no scream from clouds, but it came still. And by then the cave wasn't just a shelter, it was a legend. And Miriam Vale, she was anything more than that. She was the storm that stayed, the mountain's daughter, the fire that winter failed Ta's mother. And as the snow returned gentle and slow, curling along the ridge like kite was knocking politely this time, Miriam stood at the entrance with her children. and did not flinch because now the cave was ready, and so was she. The second winter did not scream. It crept. It came not like an invader, but like a ghost. Frost nibbling at the grass before sunup, ice growing in the bucket overnight. A silent tightening of the world day after day until the warmth no longer returned in full. The storm off last year had been a fury, a war against flesh and timber, but this winter was something else, quieter, crueler, patient, and Miriam Vale, now known from one ridge to the next as the Cave Widow, was ready, but even she did not expect what that second winter would demand. By the first snowfall in mid-October, the cave was fortified in ways even she hadn't imagined. The year before, the timber wall had been rebuilt twice, now double thick with mud packing the inner layer like bricks. A sloped overhang of scavenged tin sheets directed rain and melt away from the entrance. Inside, a layered floor of woven straw mats and buffalo hide trapped warmth better than any cabin floor. There were 7 caches, 1 for meat, 2 for roots, 1 for firewood, 1 hidden cache of medical bark and pieces, 1 for kindling and paper, and 1 buried far behind the cave's farthest point, reserved only for the children, if they ever had to flee alone. The cave no longer housed only Miriam and her children. A few of the original survivors had returned, not just to visit, but to stay. Not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they had seen what it was like to survive near her. Because the cave had become the only home they trusted in a world that had betrayed them. There was old Bart Crawley, who had lost his cabin and his pride, but gained a kind of steady devotion to the widow. There was Miss Elela Nena Hart, a sharp, tongued former school teacher who limped from a badeep, but had more knowledge of herbs and dried roots than any preacher had verses. There was little Max Berylissix, whose parents had not survived the last Thor, and a few others. 10 souls in all, with Miriam and the children, and though no one claimed her as their leader, everyone followed her hands. She spent her mornings teaching not from books, but from muscle, how to gut a rabbit in 10 seconds, how to read the temperature of stone by the crackle off fire, how to breathe through a fever, how to store snow so it melted clean, how to hear the difference between footsteps meant to flee and footsteps meant to steal. And every evening, as the wind grew sharp, she sat beside Jacob and Lena at the fire's edge and told stories, not of magic, not of heroes, but of warnings dressed as fables. The man who forgot to check his flue and burned in his sleep, the child who laughed too loudly and drew coyotes, the woman who trusted a stranger who smiled with too many teeth. Every tale ended the same way, but the cave never lied. That's what she'd say. That's what the children repeated like scripture. The cave never lied. The first test off new winter came on the 3rd week of snow. A boy, no older than 15, appeared at the mouth of the trail, dragging a sled with 2 burlap sacks tied to it. His lips were blue, his hands gloveless, but his eyes were wide and alert. He didn't cry or call out. He waited. Miriam stepped outside, axe slung over her shoulder. She said nothing for a long time, just stared. Then she nodded once. Come forward. He stumbled, fell, tried to stand, but couldn't. She ran to him then, catching his elbow. The others rushed down, carrying him up the trail. Inside, as they cut his boots free and thawed his fingers with warm cloth, he managed 2 words. They're coming. Who? Miriam asked. He couldn't say. His throat cracked with cold. But the next morning, smoke rose from the ridge east of the valley. Not a cabin, not a signal fire. A camp. Within a week, they saw the signs, tracks through the snow, heavy with weight, wide as wagon ruts, footsteps that circled back. Scented cloth hung high on tree branches, someone marking territory. Miriam stood on the ridge watching. We've got squatters, Bart said. That's militia campfire style. Tight, fast burning. Probably 5 or 6 men. They know how to wait. They're not waiting, Miriam said. They're watching us. Not yet, but soon. Elela Nena folded her arms. They came all the way up this ridge for something. It wasn't the view on the 9th night. The visitors came, not guns blazing, just a single figure. He stood at the edge of the trail, cloak wrapped tight, wide hat drawn low. He didn't knock, didn't whistle, just stood silent as a post until Miriam opened the door and stepped into the snow. "You looking for shelter?" she asked. The man didn't respond. His beard was patchy. His hands were gloved, but the left hand trembled. Faintly, "You sick?" she asked. "No." "You armed?" "Yes." She didn't blink. "Say what you came to say." He took a long breath. "This cave herd kept folks alive last year." "It did. My men and me. We need shelter." "How many?" "6. You're." "One man." "That's not 6. He smiled barely. "We don't all walk at the same speed." She considered. "You're carrying weapons always." "Then no." He tilted his head. "Well, trade." "I don't trade with men who lie with quiet eyes." His hand twitched toward his coat. She didn't reach for her axe, just said, "Calm as anything. You're not the first man who tried to take something warm from me. But the last one didn't leave walking." He paused, measured her, then stepped back. "You'll see me again." "Hesed, I see you now," she replied. He vanished into the trees like smoke. That night, Miriam didn't sleep. She boiled pine sap and bear lard into a thick mixture and spread it along the inside of the wall. Added insulation. Yes, but also an old trick to dull the scent of smoke and bodies. She reinforced the rear vent, checked the caches, counted their route, bundles 3 times. Then she woke Jacob. "You remember the chute I showed you last spring?" He nodded behind Thebic stone. "Take Lena tomorrow. Go through it. Find the trail on the other side. If anything happens, if you hear shouting or the fire goes out and doesn't come back, you run. You don't wait. You don't come back." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he saw the look in her eyes and didn't. The attack came on the 12th night. Not with cannon fire or war cries, just the soft crack of a twig under a boot, then another. Then silence. Miriam stood inside the main room of the cave, every torch extinguished, every sound held still. She had set a line of tripwires, nothing fancy, just fishing twine strung with tin scraps from the old kettle. When it rattled, she raised the axe. The wall shuddered once, twice, then the timber frame buckled inward with agrush. A shape leapt through, tall, fast, followed by another. Bart fired a single shot from the back. Sparks lit there, then chaos. Miriam didn't swing like a soldier. She moved like a mother who'd memorized every stone under her feet. She struck once, blunt side of the axe, into the ribs of the first man. He went down. The second grabbed her shoulder, spun her. She headbutted him. Blood spilled. He screamed. But more were coming. Nena was shouting. Bart was reloading. One of the children cried out. And then from the rear of the cave, a sudden gust, cold air. The chute, Jacob and Lena had gone. Miriam smiled, then turned and swung the axe again. It lasted less than 3 minutes. 3 of them lay unconscious. 1 ran, the 5th, he never made it inside. Bart found him outside, half frozen, holding a torch with no flame. The man had stood frozen by fear or cold or both. When it was over, Miriam stood over the man she'd headbutted, breathing hard. He coughed, looked up at her. You're not just a widow." She leaned close. "I'm the reason the wind fears this cave." They didn't come back. Not that winter, not the next. Word spread faster than supplies that season. "Don't go up to Widow's Rock. The cave eats men." Miriam never corrected it. Let them say what they would. The snow melted again. The river ran again. And for the first time in years, spring came early. The frost receded like a scolded dog. The flowers returned stronger than before. So did the trees, and the cave stayed standing. Years passed. Lena became a mapmaker, charting the ridges around Thekov, drawing the passes with lines of charcoal and soot. Jacob raised goats in the higher trails, herding them like a born shepherd, quiet and confident. Bart eventually died peacefully beside the fire. They buried him near the ridge. Nena grew older, but never weaker. Others came and went. Some stayed for seasons, some for only a day, but every person who left the cave did so changed, and every person who arrived found one truth waiting for them. The cave never led, and neither did the woman who made it a home. Miriam Vale died quietly in her sleep one spring morning with her children beside her. The fire warm, the smoke rising straight through the vent. She was buried behind the cave. Beneath a stone engraved by hand, she didn't ask the mountain for mercy, she made it hers.